Okay, here's what I'm going to share with you.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some really, really interesting things happen in my writing life.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting ones, I think, some of the most interesting ones, seemed like small events at the time, but then you come to look back on them and think, hey, that was really quite something.
Well-examined life.
There you go.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
This is something that happened in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
I had been granted the privilege of living in the Spanish House by the Watts Labor Community Action Committee, WLCAC,
Right.
over on 122nd Street.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had a house. I had been given a house to live in return for teaching a writing class at WLCAC.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is I had no other income at all whatsoever.
Oh my, really?
Yeah, at the time. I only paid $100 of rent. No, it was just $100 for utilities in this place.
Okay.
4-bedroom house, me. Except that Terry Watkins made me understand if somebody comes to town that we need to put them up, we'll have to bring them to the Spanish House.
Uh-huh. No problem.
Okay, I'll accept that. A friend of mine had a son who was just being released from prison after 10 years for cocaine. What's that thing? Cocaine to use and distribute or something.
Right.
What the charge was.
Okay.
Anyway, he did 10 years. He called me up, got in touch. He said, hey, brother just got out of jail with me. And he'd like to talk to you about something that's on his mind. Okay, you know. They came over. His name is Paul. I just let him. His name is Paul. Beautiful man. They had been lifting weights.
Okay.
Like two
Atlases, right? Okay, right. Okay, yeah.
And he sat down. You know, my friend's son was always. I'm very respectful. I've always been Uncle Odie to him. And you know, Paul was in the same mode. He's very, you know, very much a gentleman. And he says, listen, I have a compelling story. I have really a compelling story. I would like to see a screenplay out of it. I'd like to see a screenplay done about it. So yeah, you know, just, okay, that sounds good. My friend tells me that you can write a screenplay. I said, yeah, I can write a screenplay. I said, well, you know, I just got out of jail. I don't have any money. I'm, you know, he was so driven by this compulsion to do this thing that mattered more than anything.
Wow. Okay.
So I tell you what, let's work out something. What if what if I did a screenplay and we had a deal that granted you, since this is your idea, 70%, 30%. Total. I mean, you know, gross or net, however it's done. I'll draw up a contract to that idea. It's okay. You know, but I have to tell you, I feel really, really bad about not being able to give you any money. You know, so well, find a way to give me some money. He came back about a week later with $300.
Okay.
He came back about a week later and gave another $300. Okay. I hadn't had $600 in my hands in 2-3 years, you know, so I got busy. It was an interesting project. And what I'd like to do is read the synopsis of what the screen. I don't want to read you the contract. It just simply said, this served as a binding agreement between Paul, the producer, Odie, the writer, and Black Wall Street is the working title of it.
Oh my goodness, okay.
1999.
All right, I love
November 1999.
Okay. Well, I'd love to hear this. So you want to tape that tonight?
I'm going to read the synopsis.
Okay, well, the camera's been rolling.
Oh. Well, you should.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Odie Hawkins,
Yes.
and I'm talking to Salena-Hawkins about a screenplay I wrote.
Okay.
How long's it been going? I mean,
Since you started, and you were so much into your conversation. Well, let's just do it.
okay, let's just do it before the bombardment
Yes.
goes on for too much.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Black Wall Street, and I wrote the synopsis, treatment, and the screenplay years before they made it into a movie. The people who did, they did Black Wall Street.
Okay.
This is the synopsis. It's very short.
Mm-hmm.
In 1921, there was a race riot in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that left more than 300 African Americans dead and more than 1,000 houses burned to the ground. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, city authorities buried the victims in unmarked mass graves, refused outside help except for the Red Cross for the survivors, and tried to use fire ordnance to scam the land from those who had been burned out. Finally, they tried to erase the whole thing from public memory until African Americans, Don Ross, Oklahoma state representative, prodded the state legislature to uncover the truth. The state assembled an 11-member Tulsa Race Riot Commission to document what happened, establish a realistic death count, calculate the damage that had been done, and give a recommendation on restitution.
Cool.
Hundreds of black and white Tulsans cooperated to bring vital information to the commission's attention. Clyde Snow, the world's leading forensic anthropologist, is preparing to unearth the gruesome proof of a tragedy that's been buried for 3/4 of a century.
Well.
Drowning fire in my throat.
I see. Mm-hmm.
You might say this an Oklahoma Truth Commission, says Snow, comparing the panel to those mandated for countries emerging from civil wars, dictatorship, or purges of their own people. Tulsa, Oklahoma, a city of 800,000, the commission's findings to be presented in January 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Will derive a bad image of violence and lawlessness. Others, of course, will recoil at the idea of a tax-funded restitution. The deeper questions, how civic bodies turn criminal and how winners write the history.
Ah, so true.
Prior to that madness, Tulsa, the 50 blocks wedged north of downtown Greenwood, the African-American section of Tulsa was sometimes called the Negro Wall Street. Doctors, teachers, laborers, prospering African-Americans, roughly 15,000, first brought to Tulsa in the early 1830s by slave-owning Indians, not chattel slaves owning Indians. African-Americans populated the area before whites, and by the 1920s constituted 12% of its residents. During World War I, Oklahoma produced more than 1/3 of the nation's oil, 90% of it from Tulsa. But it was also race riot time. Black veterans who had fought for democracy abroad were not willing to relinquish the notion of freedom at home. They fought the idea of inferiority based on race. They had proven themselves. Segregation because of racial inferiority was clearly bullshit. Always has been. May 31, 1921. A 19-year-old African-American shoeshine man named Dick Rowland was arrested for allegedly assaulting a 17-year-old white female elevator operator. No evidence yet exists in the known world where a sane black man has ever assaulted any white female at midday in a public elevator, even in Oklahoma. Subsequent investigation by historian Scott Ellsworth in his book Death in a Promised Land indicates that the woman never pressed charges. And the worst that had happened is that Rowland had probably stumbled when entering the elevator and touched her. The racist reporter in the local tabloid gave his own spin to the scene. Nabbed Negro for attacking girl in elevator. The Tulsa Tribune. This story was excised from all copies of the newspapers before they were archived. Witnesses from that time, however, recall the words clearly. To lynch Negro tonight, The headline read, 45 minutes after the newspaper hit the streets, police got word that white Tulsans were talking about lynching. All copies of the newspaper headline to lynch Negro tonight, appearing on the back page, was excised from the newspaper before it was archived. Witnesses from the era, however, validate the incendiary editorial. By nightfall, 2,000 whites had mobbed up outside the courthouse about 5 miles from Greenwood. 75 armed African-American war veterans approached the police offering to help protect the accused, 19-year-old Dick Rowland. Their offer was rejected. Historian Scott Ellsworth, in his 1982 book, Death in the Promised Land, says that the group of veterans were leaving when a white man saw a tall black veteran with an army pistol and demanded to know what he planned to do with it. I'm going to use it if I need to, said the man, recently home from serving in France. The white man tried to disarm him. Someone fired. The battle was on.
Oh my.
Eddie Fay Gates, historian and commissioner member, traced the riot's trajectory. The murders raged in the area through the night. Blacks hunted down by gangs of whites shooting from cars. Funeral home records and death certificates suggested between 150 and 250 African Americans were slaughtered. At dawn, a whistle signal put 10,000 whites to work, torching houses and businesses in Greenwood with gasoline. Survivors state that airplanes dropped explosives. On June 1st, Oklahoma's governor called out the National Guard. By then, about 700 families had fled the city looking for safety. A few found shelter in white-owned churches, others with white homeowners in outlying towns. At least 4,000 people were forced at gunpoint into internment camps. The convention hall, the fairgrounds, and the city ballpark became prisons. Tulsa's blacks were forbidden to leave unless released by white employers. It took years, of course, for the people to recover from what happened. About 1,000 families spent the summer, fall, and winter living in tents.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah.
More than 30 blocks of Greenwood had been leveled. 10,000 African Americans were left homeless. Thrust into the national spotlight, Tulsa's propagandists quickly commandeered the riot narrative. A statement from the city's white pastors declared, "The fair name of the city of Tulsa has been tarnished and blackened by a crime that ranks with the dastardly deeds of the Germans during the Great War, provoked by the bad elements of the Negroes arming themselves and marching through the streets of our city." The Tribune and civic leaders echoed the sentiment. They were blaming the victims for the riot, the usual bullshit.
Right.
The usual.
The usual bullshit.
Ellsworth wrote, "White Tulsa did not rebuild black Tulsa. Indeed, the city government and other white groups tried to prevent the rebuilding. All offers of outside aid were rejected, save for contribution from the Red Cross. Tulsa would redress its own sins," town father said. Soon after the riot, the city commissioner passed a fire ordinance outlawing new building on several Greenwood blocks, proposing that the black community resettle to the north and east of its original site.
Oh my goodness.
City officials also began action to build a railroad depot on Greenwood's raised land, forestalled only by a lawsuit in district court. But other legal motions, more than 1,000 insurance claims, as well as several suits against the city of Tulsa, failed. Finally, on loans and grit, Greenwood's blacks began to rebuild the community by themselves. Slightly more than a decade later, benefiting from Tulsa's relative immunity to the Great Depression, Greenwood came back. and silence about the riot was snowed under by black and white. In 1956, when a teacher at Tulsa's Booker T. Washington High told teenage Don Ross about the riot, Ross was furious. "I said, you're a liar," recalls Ross, who is black. I couldn't believe that anyone would do what he said they had done. I'd never heard about it. My family never talked about it. My neighbors never talked about it. Seriously, burly, outspoken Oklahoma State rep, now in his 50s.
Right.
Convinced, however, when his teacher showed him an album of clippings and photos, Ross grew obsessed with prying the story open. Ross, as a teenager, coaxed spoken account from dozens of survivors in his neighborhood, in his community. Ross began to understand why some had stayed quiet. They would be crying, beating the table as they relived the disaster, Ross recalls. They'd be afraid someone in the Klan would somehow find out about their telling me and would get them. But not all kept silent out of fear. Doris McCondici, 88, says she never spoke of the riot because she needed to look forward. So terrified during the Greenwood exodus that she hid in the chicken coop, McCondici never asked her family questions about the riot afterward. I felt that they didn't have to tell me what I saw, she says. We were just happy to rebuild.
Thank you.
Tulsa's establishment had its own reason for silence, says the 45-year-old historian Ellsworth, who is white.
Right.
When the riot happened, the white city fathers realized they had a big PR problem, says Ellsworth, a Tulsa native.
Right.
So they very soon put out the notion, Tulsa is ashamed by that event and well might it be. But what really happened for 50 or 70 years was, if not a conspiracy of silence, a culture of silence. In the 1970s, after commissioning writer Ed Wheeler to report, Tulsa's Chamber of Commerce refused to print what he produced.
Oh, wow.
A decade later, when Ellsworth wrote his book, the University of Oklahoma Press refused to look at it.
Oh, my goodness.
Published in Louisiana in 1982, the book seemed to open the city's logjam of denial.
Right.
Ellsworth said scores of whites helped him with his research. Still, the breadth of the silence amazes Tulsa filmmaker Mike Wilkerson, who spent 5 years shooting a riot documentary which is scheduled to come out this winter. I spent many years as a criminal investigator, Wilkerson says, and I would have said before 5 years ago that you couldn't cover up a crime of this magnitude.
Okay.
Although Ross didn't write down what he heard as a teenager, he bore the survivors' collective anger for decades.
Wow.
Elected to the state legislature 18 years ago, he vowed to make Tulsa get at the truth. In 1966, inspired when survivors of a similar but smaller riot in Rosewood, Florida, were awarded reparations by the state, Ross pushed through a bill forming the 11-member Tulsa Race Riot Commission. In the years since, investigators have located 65 riot survivors, some in their 100s,
Oh, my God.
and videotaped their accounts. But one essential resource remains to be mined: the bland prairie surface of Tulsa itself, and snow is waiting patiently to dig. Documents and interviews seem to confirm the rumors of a large body count. This fall, an 88-year-old white man told commissioners of the huge crates he saw standing by an unmarked pit in the grassy Pauper's Corner of the city cemetery. City cemetery. Peering into one box before being shooed off, he saw the bodies of 4 black men. State archaeologists are testing the site with the same ground-penetrating radar used to find mass graves in Kosovo. Good, solid, forensic evidence is hard to argue with, Snow says. It puts it on the historical record that these things did happen, so that revisionists can't come along a generation from now and say no. Whether in El Salvador or Oklahoma, he adds, exhumations also quiet communal ghosts. I haven't found a culture yet where people don't have this feeling that they want their dead folk back. Snow observes, even if it's just a cardboard box of bones.
This is true.
Though the findings won't reflect well on the city's history, the mayor, newspapers, and many citizens are backing the project. The commission, however, does prompt some unease.
Oh.
The idea of restitution in particular
Yes.
raised hackles for many. It's fine to acknowledge the past, they complain in letters to the editor and over their breakfast tables, but there should be a fine line between taxpayers and their errant ancestors. David Jones, grandson of the Tulsa Tribune editor who presided over the infamous May 31 edition, carves that line deeply. A former reporter who now runs a modest bookstore, Jones rarely heard about the riot while growing up or working at the now defunct newspaper. I wish they had done this investigation 20 years earlier, when more survivors were living, he asserts. But restitution? I'm not one of those people who says, oh my God, my family may have done wrong 70 years ago.
Right.
But let's get out the sackcloth and ashes. I have enough of my own sins to account for. They always say that.
Right.
I didn't benefit from that.
Definitely. That was them.
It was them. It was then. Yet reparation supporters such as Commission member and author Eddie Gates say the riot robbed black Tulsans not only of money but also the chance to educate and assist their children.
Yes.
The illegal acts of city leaders and police who deputized hundreds of men who then rampaged through Greenwood. Just, hey, come on, white guy, you're a deputy. Left behind a community debt, Gates insists. Most of the survivors, 80, 90, 100 years old, say they just want the Greenwood story known.
There you go.
When asked, their views on restitution reflect their unique experiences. But Condici is charming, fluttering a tissue while she considers the question. She recalls the men splashing gasoline on her church, adults running in night clothes and bare feet, the body of her family pastor laid out in a bombed-out funeral home. Restitution is pointless, she says. The pioneers who built Greenwood, who should have been recompensated, are all dead. A few blocks away, her childhood buddy, Kenny Booker, feels the past differently. I'm going to do my best to try to forgive what happened, but it's difficult, Booker said. And Booker still has nightmares about his father's house burning around him. Some of these people, we saw 3 of them recently, who had been refused compensation. I think one is 109 now. It appears that the commission that they have is just simply trying to wait till they drop dead.
Probably. Probably. It seems that way.
But it just goes to show you that I've been busy for a while.
Okay.
People, I'm going to get to this a little bit more often in the future because I have at least a dozen screenplays that I've been commissioned for, and in several cases paid some little money to to become a part of the project. Unfortunately, the project has not been brought forward. But I still have all of the evidence of having participated in it.
On the shelf.
The Clotilde is one of them. The story of the last shipment of enslaved Africans to America from West Africa to Magazine Plateau Point, Alabama.
That was interesting.
I went down to Little Africa in 1995 or something, whatever it was, and met some of the last surviving members. And they were some people in their 70s and 80s then. I was taken to the church where they first started when they were...
Were they mellow 70s, like, or they... the older 70s or younger 70s?
They were, some
Southern,
cases, you know.
Southern 70s.
Well, to me, they struck me as being rather spry for 70,
Okay.
80, because they were people who had been active all their lives, you know.
Okay.
They chopped wood, they thought nothing about, let's go over here and see so-and-so, you know. Where is that? 2 miles away. And you get on a dirt road, you walk, you know.
Okay.
We jump in cars. And
Yes, indeed. Went down to the
one of the
7-Eleven,
ladies,
yeah.
one of the ladies who was a older member named Mama Eva, they call her Mama Eva, remembers older members of her community and Kofi, Uncle Kofi, and they call him Uncle Cuffy. And if you go to Ghana, you find out that Kofi is, you know, Uncle Cudjo, they called him,
Okay.
but his name was Kofi.
Right.
The white family who imported these people were still very well-to-do, upstanding members of their community who always shied away from talking about anything because I think they were afraid of being pressed for reparation.
Right.
They should be.
Yes,
And,
especially in this climate, this
Okay.
political climate.
but political climate, Africatown is still there,
Wow.
and they're still trying to break it up and tear it apart by running freeways through it. So that's it for this evening.
Yes.
I didn't know that I was being.
Candid camera moment. Here we go.
Well, I think that was one of your little tricks. So
Your
Odie
website,
Hawkins saying,
your website,
Yes.
www.odiehawkins.com. odihawkins.com, and you're on Amazon. You have an official site, and people can tune in on tomorrow.
okay, great. Tell me what time we're coming on, so I'll know.
No,
But it's okay.
that's a secret.
It's okay.
Other people.
It
This